Welcome to Discovering Creativity. We have today Florian Rassler and Stacey Alcocer talking about these subjects. And I want to invite them to have a conversation, but just to explain a little bit about this initiative. This is a collaboration between the American Creativity Association, Texas A&M University, and the Instituto Samielense from Mexico. So welcome all of you, and I'll let you start the interview. See you later.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Rassler. How are you?
Hi. Nice. Call me Florian, please. Stacey. Hi.
Thank you. Hi. So my first question, why the name Creaffective?
Yeah, I've been asked this a few times, and actually, so there's a reason behind the name. Although the name, before I start explaining the reason, the name has a big disadvantage. So I'm here in Munich, Germany, and whenever I do go on business trips and the hotels ask me for the company name, and I tell them Creaffective, they kind of look at me a bit nervous and say, "How do you spell that?" And they don't know how, so they never know how to spell it. But once I explain it, it's actually pretty obvious, at least in English. So Creaffective is a combination of creative and effective. And I guess English speaker can kind of guess that's what the meaning, but here in Germany, often people just find it a weird name. And I chose it because I often encountered that people think, or they have let's say the prejudice that creativity or being creative and being effective is some kind of contradiction or is not possible at the same time. And I wanted to express that it's very well possible to be creative and to be effective. And that the organization is not looking for basically helping people to be more creative just for the sake of being creative, but there's always this component of we are embedded in organization, and it's also about being effective. And that's why it's creative and effective, Creaffective. So that's the name in a nutshell.
Makes perfect sense. How would you define a creative culture in a company?
I'd say a creative culture is a culture that allows creativity in the sense of it makes it more likely for ideas to come about. It makes it more likely for people to think in a different way, but also to voice these ideas, maybe to, first of all, having different ideas, new ideas, looking at things in a different way, maybe looking at the problem in a different way, but being comfortable of sharing and voicing those thoughts. I'd say that's a creative culture. Also maybe a culture that allows for the separation of coming up with options and evaluating those options. I'm sure you've come across that principle, divergent and convergent, right? And not doing that at the same time, but a culture where it's possible to actually diverge and converge and not doing it at the same time.
Would you consider that to be, so I'm a teacher, would you consider that to be the same definition in a school setting? The free flowing of ideas between teachers or grade levels, and
I think I never thought about this. I think yes, in school, it is my experience in my school time, like 35 years ago, in school, it was very much focused on being convergent, right? So there's the teacher, there's the right answer, there's going to be the test, and you better give me the right answer at the test, otherwise your score is going to be low. And often thinking in a different way was not always encouraged, say this way. And I could imagine that also a creative culture at school would allow for or would even encourage different ways of looking at things, and maybe also coming up with new and novel ways of looking at something or ideas for how to define something. So yes, I would say that would also work in a school setting. I haven't thought about how evaluations would take place, but I'm also confident that there are ways to evaluate students' performance without only looking at the correct answer.
I agree completely. Okay, how have you measured a creative culture within a company in the past?
Actually, I have not measured it. it's mostly working with the people, and often at the beginning working with decision makers, and it's then often through interviews with people or conversations with people, conversations with different people from different areas, and you get a good sense of whether people feel it's that the culture supports or allows creativity, or it makes it more difficult, and you need to be very courageous actually to think in a different way. But I've never tried to measure it. I remember back when, this is how Hector and I met, and when we were in Buffalo, there were different tests actually to measure creativity. And if I remember correctly, there is not really one that measures creativity per se, but different aspects of it. So I never actually tried to use some kind of measurement, but it's really more, talking to people and also then asking them what's not working for them, or what they see would need to change.
Okay. What are some initiatives a company may take to transition into a more creative culture?
So the first thing I would see is to be aware of where, as an organization, do we want to be more creative, and where do we not want or need to be more creative. I wouldn't say that per se. It's always good to say we have to be creative everywhere. It's also like, it's not about we want to be proactive and change everything. You have to also be reactive and not change certain things in order to be able to change and be proactive at certain things. So I think the first step would be think about where would you want to be more creative in the first place. And I think that's not everywhere. So some things maybe are not necessary to be more creative.
Right.
And then, so be clear, like, okay, what are some areas where we want to be more creative, and then how can we nurture more creativity in these areas? Then I think another, at least here in Germany, there's a term. I think it's a word that also works the same in English. That would be ambidexterity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like having two hands and being aware. Okay, where do we want to be creative, and where is it about little mistakes, operational excellency? So then you have different evaluation criteria, and also different criteria of how you would evaluate different behaviors. So I think that's also important. And once you're aware of that, I think another aspect or an initiative could be allow experimentation. So allow experimentation in certain fields. And one way of what I made very good experiences with, one way of allowing experiments and allowing to try out new things, is to think in what's called affordable loss. So that basically means what would you be willing to invest or risk and possibly lose 100% of in order to try it out, in order to find out if something works. And I found that to be a very powerful principle, or a very powerful way of thinking, to think in terms of affordable loss, and define certain areas where we do want to think in terms of affordable loss, and ask ourselves, so what would we be willing to do? What would we be willing to invest and even lose in order to try out new things, in order to see if something works?
You're saying that, and I'm translating that in my teacher brain. How can I take that and put it in my classroom? And I can see how it can be effective. Okay.
Can you tell me, how would you put it into your classroom?
Sure.
Like affordable loss?
For that, when I'm thinking in affordable loss, if I'm wanting to try a new idea or new technique, let's say to teach short response in reading, to a reading passage. Well, this is the way I've always done it. I know I can get results this way.
Yeah.
What am I willing to invest? What am I willing to lose? I can lose a day of class time, maybe 2 days if this other way doesn't work. And I know that I can still fall back on this tried and true to get the results that I want.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's how I'm translating.
And I think that might even also work with also with students on the other side, right? See, so what are some things that you guys are willing to invest to try and to see if that actually works? And
exactly.
different people might have different levels of what an affordable loss is for them, right? So for some it's like half an hour, and maybe for you it's 2 days of classroom.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. In what ways do you think that creative methodologies can help collaboration?
So I'm one of my main roles when I work with organizations, or they're different roles, but one role I frequently have is that of a facilitator, and using processes and tools and techniques of creative thinking and creative problem solving to help a group solve problems or come up with new solutions to whatever problem they have. And I think they can help tremendously. And I just recently had a feedback from a customer who said we got more done in the last 2 days than in the previous 3 months before. And so I think it can be these methods can be very effective. And I think a main part of it, again, is very simple. Actually, we don't need a lot of methodologies, but I see two main things. Apart from the facilitator itself, the first one is to have some kind of understanding of a creative process. So in the sense of where are we at the moment? So are we trying to figure out what the issue is, or are we trying to understand the situation better? Are we already trying to think in solutions, or are we already testing out solutions? And having a common understanding of where we are at the moment in such a process, and make sure that we are on the same page, so to say, or in the same step. So I think that's one big aspect. And the other one that I already mentioned is also being aware of when we diverge and when we converge, and that we diverge at the same time and that we converge at the same time. And I think if these things are given, so that there's a common awareness of some kind of a process, regardless of what it is, common understanding where we are in the process, and the common understanding if we're currently diverging or converging, supported by a facilitator, I think there is a very positive effect on collaboration, and I've seen it many times.
Excellent. Can you share some success stories of companies that have used the creative methods and have had some sort of business breakthrough? Like you just mentioned, you had just been with a company and they've done more in 2 days than the previous 3 months.
There are frequent examples. I'm just thinking about which ones I'm allowed to tell you without violating an NDA that I signed. But it's often so. One where it's sometimes very obvious is in technical product development, right? And then there were situations where they just felt, okay, this is the direction, this is the goal, but currently we don't know how to get there. We've been talking about it or thinking about it for weeks or even months, and we feel that we are running around in circles, but we're not really making progress. So I've worked with customers that created parts that you now find in cars, like connectors in cars that are necessary for signals to flow in cars. I work with customers that create power plants or generators within power plants, and they have different challenges for these. So and then often, one of their requirements is, or one of their challenges is, we know where we want to go to, but at the moment we're not sure how to get there. And you have all those technical experts. They're very knowledgeable, but at the same time, they have a hard time thinking in a different way because they're very much trapped into their existing way of thinking, and they're very quick at knowing why something won't work. And applying what I just told you before, we have solved numerous technical problems and now see products on the market. But these are all things that, as a normal, let's say, citizen or consumer, you would never realize, but they're now part of either cars or used for generating electricity in different countries in the world, for example.
Very well. Thank you. How have you internalized creative thinking principles to help you navigate change?
Well, not really my first, but what my most intense exposure to those principles was when I was at the International Center for Studies in Creativity in Buffalo back then in 2008 to 2010. This is where we practiced this a lot, and basically ever since, part of it as a trainer and facilitator, I'm using those principles with customers. At the same time, we are using them within our own 6-person company. So it's also like part of our culture and how we work together. And we give each other feedback, and kind of now created a culture where it's very obvious if you would, let's say, violate the creative principles, let's say this way. And I've also tried to practice them within my family, which led to some very interesting conversations with my son. So that's also a good, trying to apply it in different contexts. And in the beginning, very much doing it deliberately, reminding myself. And I think now, after 16 years, I would hope I would kind of have them internalized, but sometimes still reflecting for myself how well is it going, and is there something I can do better.
So you monitor yourself for feedback as well.
Say that again?
You monitor yourself for feedback as well.
I do reflect.
Like reevaluating and reflecting.
Yes, I do reflect. We sometimes also, in our organization, we do that in the team and get feedback from each other, and also in regards to how we are in terms of collaborating with others, and also in terms of how we are communicating and interacting, and also then in terms of allowing for creativity to happen and applying creative principles. Yes.
Okay. What is some advice you could give to viewers to enhance their ability to think creatively?
So it always comes back, but for me, the most basic but most important principle is really to internalize separating divergent and convergent thinking. So coming up with options and evaluating those options and not doing that at the same time, and getting really comfortable with that, and not be, let's say, not be fearful also, or feeling awkward of like divergent in the presence of others. So I think that's like a key, very basic key thing. But once that is established, the separation of divergent and convergent, I think that's a big step. I think another aspect enhanced for the ability to think creatively, don't assume too quickly that you know what your problem is. So spend some time on staying with whatever you think your challenge or problem is, and maybe reframe your problem, or try to reframe your problem, because often it's difficult to find solutions because you're looking at the problem, let's say, in the wrong way. Of course, you never know what is the wrong way, but sometimes looking at the problem in a different way can lead to make it easier, basically, to come up with different ways or different solutions. I think another aspect is sometimes take your time. So don't try to force it in the sense of, okay, I have to come up with something in the next whatever hour, but sometimes it just takes some time to incubate, and it's also fine actually to plan for that time, or at least to leave space for that time for incubation. And I think another aspect, you said ability to think creatively, and then I would add, it's not only about thinking, but also about doing. So basically try it out. So try things out, because often you can only think to a certain extent, but then you have to do things, experience, and see how things work. And then depending on whatever comes out of that, trying it out, then you think about what happens next.
Okay, what are some different challenges that the Chinese culture in Taiwan brings to the incorporation of creative thinking practices or methodologies?
I'm curious, how did you come up with that question? Sorry, I have to ask the question back.
Dr. Ramos
Uh-huh.
mentioned that you had been in Taiwan for 2 years.
Yes. So I've lived in Taiwan for 2 years. I'm already back in Germany now for the last 2 years, but that's what I've lived there. So some challenges for the culture in Taiwan. I think it's similar in Taiwan, in China, in maybe Korea, Japan. At least these are the countries that I know. And I think some challenges that I see, again, working in my role mostly as facilitator. So one is trying to phrase it in a neutral way, too much respect for hierarchy. And that makes it that again makes it difficult for people to engage, for example, in divergent thinking or to voice opinions, right? Because people are very conscious of or very aware of who's in the room, and they're very, very conscious of or try to figure out what are these people thinking about when I say something. So that means in the beginning, I need to invest quite some time to build trust and make people feel safe enough to actually engage in the creative process. Because often what you will see otherwise is that people are very quiet, which doesn't mean that they do not have a lot of thinking going on, but they have reasons for not voicing their thoughts. And that is something that I see, and it's also connected to another aspect of the culture there, which is basically what they would call like saving face or losing face, right? You don't want to look you don't want to look stupid in front of others, and you're very aware of what other people are doing, and it basically a bit different to, for example, the US or also part of Germany. You don't want to stand out too much, but you want to be very similar to everybody else because you don't want to be that different. So that's a different cultural way of looking at things. And I think, the main challenge is to get people feel safe and comfortable enough to be comfortable voicing their thoughts, ideas, and opinions, even if they're not well thought through. And that people are not afraid of the judgment and the viewpoints of other people. I think that's something to be very aware of, and especially in an organizational setting. Then, when you have people from different hierarchies being in the room, I need to take extra precautions for that, not to interfere with the process, right? And culturally there are huge differences. For example, if you are in the room with a bunch of Dutch people, you wouldn't even know who is hierarchical highest person in the room because it doesn't show. But for example, if you do the same thing in Taiwan, without that person having said a word, you would know just by him or her coming into the room that he or she is the most senior person in the room, right? So, and these are big differences.
Yes. Okay. Is there a way that creative thinking can help you get the best out of experiences at work?
Well, I'd say at work, you encounter different, sometimes challenges, obstacles, things that you would hope could be different or could be better. And in general, I'd say if you're used to think in a creative way, you get more into that mode of, let's say, not being comfortable with the status quo, and basically be like a bit like a victim and just accept that's the way things are. But you get more proactive and think about, well, how, if I don't like it, how can I change it, right? And you feel more that you have response ability, right? In the
Right.
sense of you're able to respond to something that you feel needs to be different. Of course, sometimes you need to be aware of your circle of influence, and maybe sometimes you realize, okay, there's not much I can do. But I think in general, if you are skilled at creative thinking, then you have an easier time making the change you want to see, also in the workplace, and not just be, not necessarily comfortable, but you don't just accept a status quo that you're not happy with, but you think about how can I change it? How can I do it differently? And I think that would improve your experience in work.
Excellent. Are there anything else? Any other questions that I might have left out, or anything else to add?
No, not that I can think of now. Maybe it comes to me after the podcast interview, but not now. No.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to hearing the interview in the future.
Me too.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you. You're welcome.